The white room smelled of metal and fear. Zexithara sat in the chair that was too small for her body. Her forearms were chained to the table. Her compound eyes moved left and right as she looked at the two humans across from her. The female human wore a white coat. The male human wore a blue uniform with shiny things on his chest. Commander Jake Morrison leaned back in his chair. He had been doing this job for 10 years. He had talked to many aliens before, but this one was different. This one had seen something that made her shake even now. 3 months after the battle was over, she still jumped when doors opened too fast. Dr. Lisa Park opened her notebook. She was here to study how the alien mind worked, how it thought about war and fighting. The Coalition wanted to understand why the hegemony had given up so fast. They had more ships. They had better weapons. They should have won. Zexithara spoke in broken words at first. Her voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. She had learned some human language from the broadcasts her people had stolen, but she was getting better at it every day. That was another thing that surprised the humans. Most aliens took years to learn new languages. This one learned in weeks. Jake Morrison looked at his papers. The battle reports made no sense. The hegemony had attacked with 300 ships. The humans had only 100 ships to defend with, but somehow the aliens had retreated after just 4 months of fighting. They had sent messages asking for peace talks. They had given up whole star systems without a fight. The interrogation had been going on for 2 weeks now. Every day Zexithara told them more about her people. The hegemony was old. They had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. They had conquered 47 different species. They knew how to fight wars. They knew how to win. Zexithara's mandibles clicked as she tried to find the right words. She told them about the first time her people had seen humans. It was through the radio signals that leaked out from Earth. Her people had listened to human music and human news and human movies. They thought they understood what humans were like. The hegemony scientists had made charts and graphs about human behavior. They had watched humans fight each other in countless wars. They had seen the weapons humans used, bullets and bombs and simple chemical explosives. The hegemony used plasma that could melt through metal. They used shields that could stop any physical attack. Human weapons looked like toys to them. Dr. Park asked why the hegemony had decided to attack. Zexithara explained that the Coalition had asked humans to join them. The other alien species in the Coalition were peaceful. They liked to trade and share knowledge, but they were not good at fighting. When the hegemony started taking their worlds, the Coalition needed soldiers. The humans had said yes to joining the Coalition. But the hegemony was not worried. They had studied human military forces. Human armies looked disorganized. Human soldiers did not follow orders properly. Human weapons were primitive. Human ships were slow and weak compared to hegemony technology. Jake Morrison asked about the battle plans. Zexithara's eyes went dark as she remembered. The hegemony leaders had been confident. They had calculated a 73% chance of winning quickly. They planned to take the important human worlds in 6 months. Then the humans would surrender like every other species had done. The alien survivor's voice got quieter as she talked about the War Council meetings. The hegemony generals had laughed about human tactics. They thought human unpredictability was a sign of weakness. Other species fought in logical patterns. They used their resources efficiently. They surrendered when the math said they could not win. But humans did not follow the patterns. Zexithara had read reports of human battles throughout their history. Humans would fight even when they had no chance to win. They would destroy their own cities rather than let enemies take them. They would sacrifice thousands of soldiers to save hundreds of civilians. The hegemony had tried to understand this behavior. Their psychologists said it was a mental illness. A species that fought past the point of logic was defective. It would destroy itself eventually. The hegemony just needed to push humans to that breaking point. Dr. Park made notes about everything Zexithara said. The alien's description of human behavior sounded like madness to her own people, but to humans it sounded normal. Heroic, even. The doctor wondered if this difference in thinking was what had really won the war. Zexithara talked about the intelligence reports her people had gathered. They knew about human weapons and ships and soldiers, but they had missed something important. They had not understood what drove humans to fight. They had seen the wars in human history as proof that humans were violent and chaotic. They had not realized that all those wars had been practice. Every human conflict had taught humans something new about warfare. How to fight in space. How to fight on different worlds. How to fight when outnumbered. How to fight when outgunned. How to win when winning should be impossible. The hegemony had conquered species that had never fought real wars. Humans had been fighting real wars for thousands of years. Jake Morrison asked about the moment when the hegemony realized they had made a mistake. Zexthara's whole body shuddered. She said it was not one moment but many small moments. Each battle taught them something new about humans. Each victory cost them more than they had expected. Each defeat showed them that humans did not think like other species. The alien looked directly at both humans with her compound eyes. She said the hegemony had expected to fight soldiers, professional warriors who followed rules and strategies. Instead, they found themselves fighting an entire species that treated war like a game they enjoyed playing. And the more the game went on, the better humans got at playing it. Zexthara's voice became a whisper. She told them that her people had surrendered not because they were losing. They had surrendered because they finally understood what humans really were, and that understanding had terrified them more than any weapon ever could. Jake Morrison and Dr. Park looked at each other. They had been expecting to learn about hegemony technology or battle tactics. Instead, they were learning something much more disturbing about their own species. Something that made them wonder if humanity's victory had come at a price they did not yet understand. The interrogation room fell silent. Outside the window, stars twinkled in the darkness of space. And somewhere among those stars, other alien species were hearing the stories of what humans had done in the war. Stories that would change how the galaxy saw humanity forever. Zexthara closed her compound eyes and let her mind drift back to 6 months earlier. The memory was still clear and sharp like broken glass. She had been standing in the great war chamber of the hegemony flagship. The walls were covered with star maps and battle plans. The air hummed with the sound of computers calculating victory. War Prime Kethmore stood at the center of the room. He was the greatest military mind of their species. His scales were dark with age and covered in scars from 100 battles. He had conquered more worlds than any other hegemony commander. When he spoke, all other voices went silent. The holographic display showed human space in front of them. 12 star systems with 43 populated worlds. The human fleet consisted of 96 combat ships and maybe 200 support vessels. The numbers glowed in blue light above the war table. Simple mathematics said the hegemony would win easily. Tactical specialist Vex Anda was Zexthara's direct superior. She had studied warfare for 3 decades and never lost a campaign. Her 4 arms moved quickly over the control panels as she brought up data about human military forces. Everything they had learned from intercepted communications and stolen databases was laid out in neat charts and graphs. The human ships were primitive. They still used chemical rockets for propulsion instead of gravity drives. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and crude energy beams instead of plasma cannons. Their armor was simple metal alloys instead of adaptive energy shields. By every measure, the hegemony was centuries ahead in technology. War Prime Kethmore studied the tactical analysis with satisfaction. He had fought species with similar technology levels before. Usually the war lasted no more than 3 standard rotations. First the space battle to destroy their fleet, then orbital bombardment to break their will, finally landing troops to secure the worlds and accept surrender. Zexthara had been assigned to study human psychology and behavior patterns. She had watched thousands of hours of human entertainment broadcasts, movies about their wars, news reports about their conflicts, historical documentaries about their greatest battles. What she saw confused her more than it enlightened her. Humans seemed to enjoy fighting. Their entertainment was full of stories about warriors and soldiers and heroes who died in battle. They made songs about wars that happened hundreds of years ago. They built monuments to remember people who had lost fights but refused to give up. This behavior made no logical sense to hegemony thinking. Most species fought only when they had to. War was expensive and dangerous and wasteful. Smart leaders avoided conflicts when possible. They used diplomacy and trade and careful negotiation to get what they wanted. Fighting was the last option when all other methods failed. But humans appeared to choose fighting even when other options existed. They had fought each other constantly throughout their history, sometimes over resources or territory, which made sense, but often they fought over abstract ideas or religious beliefs or political systems. They would spend enormous amounts of money and sacrifice millions of lives for concepts that had no physical reality. Vexanda had prepared detailed reports on human military doctrine. She explained that human armies were chaotic and inefficient. They maintained multiple competing command structures. Army and Navy and Air Force all operated separately with different leaders and different goals. Their soldiers were given too much independence and often ignored direct orders from superiors. The hegemony military was organized like a perfect machine. Every soldier knew their exact role and followed orders without question. Decisions flowed down from the top, through clear chains of command. Resources were allocated precisely where they were needed most. There was no waste or confusion or contradiction. War Prime Kethmore listened to the analysis with growing confidence. He had seen this pattern before with other species. Young civilizations always made the same mistakes. They fought inefficiently because they had not learned proper military organization. Once they faced a superior force, they would realize their errors and surrender. The battle plan was elegant in its simplicity. 3 attack groups would strike simultaneously at the most important human systems. Group Alpha would target their military shipyards. Group Beta would hit their main fleet base. Group Gamma would assault their capital world. Within 6 standard rotations, human resistance would collapse. Zexathara raised a concern about some of the human behaviors she had observed. Their willingness to fight against impossible odds worried her. In one historical battle called Thermopylae, a small group of human warriors had fought against an army 50 times larger. They had known they would die but fought anyway. This kind of thinking was alien to hegemony military philosophy. Vexanda dismissed the concern with a wave of her lower arms. Ancient history was not relevant to modern warfare. Those primitive humans had fought with swords and spears. Modern humans used advanced technology and would understand the reality of military mathematics. When faced with overwhelming force, they would make the logical choice to surrender. The War Prime asked about human civilian populations. How would they react to military occupation? Most species accepted defeat gracefully. Once their governments surrendered, civilians returned to their normal lives under new leadership. Trade and commerce continued as before. Life went on with minimal disruption. But the intelligence reports on human civilians were contradictory and confusing. In some cases, they had fought against occupying forces for years after their governments fell. In other cases, they had destroyed their own infrastructure rather than let enemies use it. Some human civilians had even killed themselves rather than live under foreign rule. War Prime Kethmore studied the reports with some concern. Dealing with resistant civilian populations was expensive and time-consuming. It required leaving large numbers of troops behind to maintain order. This reduced the forces available for conquering new territories. Efficient conquest required cooperation from the defeated population. Vexanda assured him that human civilian resistance would be minimal. The examples in their history were exceptions, not rules. Most humans were reasonable people who wanted to live peaceful lives. Once they saw that the hegemony offered better technology and living standards, they would accept the new order willingly. The final element of the plan involved psychological warfare. The hegemony had used this successfully against other species. Strategic bombing of civilian targets to demonstrate power, execution of captured soldiers to discourage resistance, destruction of cultural sites to break morale. These tactics usually convinced enemy populations to pressure their leaders for surrender. Zexathara felt uneasy about applying these methods to humans. Something in their history suggested they might react differently than other species, but she could not articulate her concerns in a way that made military sense. Her superiors wanted facts and data, not feelings and intuitions. The planning session ended with confident predictions of victory. Operation Cleansing Tide would begin in 10 standard days. The hegemony fleet would jump into human space at 3 different points simultaneously. Superior numbers and technology would ensure quick success. The war would be over before the humans could mount any effective resistance. As the commanders filed out of the war chamber, Zexathara remained behind. She stared at the holographic display showing human worlds floating in empty space. Something deep in her mind whispered that they were making a terrible mistake, but she pushed the feeling away and followed her orders like a good soldier. The memory of the first battle still burned in Zexathara's mind like acid. She had been on the bridge of the flagship when they jumped into the new Harmony system. 300 hegemony ships appeared in perfect formation around the human colony world. The planet hung in space like a blue and green jewel waiting to be claimed. Admiral Tony Clark commanded the human defense fleet from his flagship, the Liberties, Dawn. 28 human ships moved to intercept the hegemony force. The numbers were so uneven that War Prime Kethmore almost felt sorry for the humans. Almost, but not quite, because mercy was a weakness that led to longer wars. Zexathera monitored the communications channels as the battle began. The hegemony sent the standard surrender demand. Submit now and your people will be treated fairly. Resist and your world will burn. Most species accepted the logical choice when faced with such overwhelming odds. But Admiral Clark's response was not logical at all. The human admiral laughed. Actually laughed over the open channel so all the hegemony ships could hear. Then he said something that made no military sense. He told his ships that today was a good day to die. He said they would show these aliens what humans were made of. He said they would make the enemy pay for every meter of space. The first exchange of fire went exactly as predicted. Hegemony plasma cannons tore through human shields like paper. Human kinetic weapons bounced off adaptive energy barriers without causing damage. 3 human ships exploded in the opening minutes while the hegemony lost nothing. The mathematics of destruction favored the superior technology completely. But then something unexpected happened. The humans did not retreat or request new surrender terms. Instead, they changed their tactics in ways the hegemony computers could not predict. Human ships stopped trying to fight at long range where hegemony weapons had advantages. They closed to point-blank distance where their primitive guns could penetrate energy shields. Captain Steve Miller commanded the destroyer USS Liberty Bell. When his weapons could not penetrate enemy shields, he did something insane. He rammed his ship directly into a hegemony cruiser at full speed. Both vessels exploded in a ball of fire and metal. 1 human ship and 1 hegemony ship destroyed in an exchange that should never have happened. Zexathera watched in horror as more human ships followed the same suicidal tactic. They would fight until their weapons were destroyed and their hulls were breached. Then instead of surrendering, they would ram enemy vessels or overload their reactors to create massive explosions. Every human ship took at least 1 hegemony ship with it when they died. War Prime Kethmore ordered his ships to maintain distance and use their range advantage. But the humans adapted again. They used debris from destroyed ships as cover to get closer. They launched boarding pods filled with soldiers who fought with chemical weapons and metal blades. They turned their support ships into guided missiles loaded with nuclear warheads. The most shocking moment came when Chief Petty Officer Rick Torres made his choice. His engineering ship was surrounded by 5 hegemony vessels trying to board and capture it. The humans inside were outnumbered 20-1. Surrender was the only logical option. But Chief Torres did not choose logic. Instead, he sent a message over all frequencies. He told the hegemony soldiers exactly what he thought of them and their empire. Then he manually overloaded the ship's reactor core while enemy troops were cutting through the hull. The explosion vaporized all 6 ships in a flash of nuclear fire that lit up the darkness of space. Zexathera realized that human communications during battle were completely different from other species. Most soldiers sent tactical reports or requests for assistance or pleas for rescue. But humans sent jokes and insults and challenges. They sang songs while their ships were being destroyed. They gave their weapons personal names and talked to them like friends. Colonel Beth Williams led the human Marines who boarded hegemony ships. Her soldiers fought with a ferocity that terrified alien crews. They used primitive chemical explosives and metal projectiles instead of advanced energy weapons. But they fought in ways that broke all known rules of civilized warfare. When human Marines were wounded, they did not retreat for medical treatment. They kept fighting until they died or the battle ended. When they ran out of ammunition, they used knives and tools and bare hands. When they were surrounded, they would detonate grenades that killed themselves and nearby enemies. Dying seemed to mean nothing to them. The hegemony had fought warrior species before. Professional soldiers who took pride in their skills and courage. But humans were different. They fought like every battle was personal. Like the enemy had insulted their families or destroyed their homes. They fought with an anger that made them more dangerous as the battle continued. Admiral Clark's flagship was the last human ship still fighting. It had lost weapons and shields and most of its hull plating. Plasma fire had burned through multiple decks. The bridge was open to space and the crew was wearing emergency suits. By all logic, the ship should have surrendered hours ago. But Admiral Clark kept fighting with whatever weapons still worked. He launched escape pods filled with explosives at enemy ships. He used maneuvering thrusters to ram smaller hegemony vessels. He broadcast defiant messages even as his ship was dying around him. He acted like victory was still Possible when defeat was mathematically certain. The end came when a hegemony dreadnought fired its main plasma cannon directly into the Liberty's dawn. The human flagship exploded in a brilliant flash that could be seen from the planet's surface. Admiral Clark and his crew died instantly. The last organized human resistance in the system was finally broken. War Prime Kethmore surveyed the battlefield with mixed emotions. Victory was complete and the human fleet was destroyed, but the cost was far higher than any projection had predicted. 47 hegemony ships were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Nearly 10,000 alien soldiers were dead. A battle that should have been easy had become a bloodbath. Zexathera studied the tactical reports with growing confusion. The humans had lost every major engagement. Their technology was inferior and their numbers were too small, but somehow they had inflicted casualties at a rate that seemed impossible. Every human death had cost the hegemony 3 alien lives. The ground invasion of New Harmony proceeded according to plan. Hegemony troops landed on the planet and advanced toward the major cities. But even here, the humans refused to follow normal patterns. Instead of surrendering when outgunned, they fought from every building and every street corner. Instead of protecting civilians, they armed them and turned them into soldiers. The victory at New Harmony was complete but hollow. The hegemony had won the battle and taken the planet, but the cost in ships and soldiers was far beyond acceptable limits. If every human world fought like this, the war would bankrupt the empire before it could be won. Something was very wrong with their understanding of human military capabilities. As Zexathara finished her account of the first battle, she looked directly at her human interrogators. She told them that New Harmony had not been a defeat for humanity. It had been a lesson, a demonstration of what humans were willing to do when cornered, and that lesson had terrified the hegemony more than any weapon could. The war had been going on for 3 months when Zexathara realized that everything the hegemony knew about warfare was wrong. She sat in her analysis chamber aboard the command ship, reading reports that made no sense. Human resistance was growing stronger instead of weaker. Every victory cost more than the last. Every conquered world became a source of new problems. General Chris Martinez commanded the human ground forces on the planet, Kepler 7. When the hegemony landed there, troops they expected to fight an organized army with clear battle lines and logical tactics. Instead, they found themselves fighting ghosts who appeared from nowhere and vanished like smoke. Human soldiers did not wear uniforms or follow standard formations. The hegemony had conquered 47 species before humans. All of them had armies that fought in predictable ways. Soldiers stayed together in units. Officers gave orders from command posts. Supply lines moved equipment from bases to front lines. When the command structure was destroyed, the army collapsed and surrendered. But human armies did not collapse when their leaders were killed. Instead, they broke into smaller groups that fought independently. Every squad became its own command unit. Every soldier became capable of making tactical decisions. Destroying one part of the human military only made the other parts harder to find and fight. Commander Kate Johnson led a special operations team that haunted hegemony supply convoys. Her soldiers would attack from hidden positions, then disappear before reinforcements could arrive. They used local knowledge and civilian support to stay invisible. They turned the planet itself into a weapon against the occupying forces. The most disturbing discovery was that human civilians did not behave like other species when their worlds were conquered. Normal civilians would hide in their homes and wait for the fighting to end. They would cooperate with occupying forces to keep their families safe. They would trade information for food and protection. Human civilians did the opposite of everything the hegemony expected. Parents taught their children how to make bombs from household chemicals. Doctors poisoned wounded hegemony soldiers instead of treating them. Teachers turned schools into hidden weapons factories. Even elderly humans and small children participated in resistance activities. Major Alex Thompson coordinated the civilian resistance networks. He was not even a real soldier but a history professor who had studied guerrilla warfare tactics. Under his guidance, ordinary humans became a military force that the hegemony could not understand or defeat. Every human on the planet became a potential enemy combatant. Zexathara read reports about bombing attacks in occupied cities. Hegemony troops would enter a building to search for weapons and the entire structure would explode. Human civilians had rigged their own homes with explosives rather than let aliens use them. They destroyed their own property to deny it to the enemy. The psychological impact on hegemony soldiers was severe. They could not tell which humans were dangerous and which were harmless. A human child might be carrying a bomb. A human doctor might inject poison instead of medicine. A human worker might sabotage equipment instead of repairing it. Every interaction with humans became a life-threatening risk. Dr. Paul Henderson worked for human military research. When his laboratory was about to be captured, he made a choice that horrified the aliens. Instead of destroying his research to keep it secret, he weaponized it against the occupying forces. He released experimental biological agents that targeted hegemony physiology specifically. The plague that followed killed thousands of alien soldiers before it could be contained. But the real horror was not the deaths but the method. Dr. Henderson had turned medical knowledge into a weapon of war. He had violated every principle of scientific ethics to harm his enemies. This kind of thinking was completely alien to hegemony understanding. War Prime Kethmore tried to apply standard occupation procedures to human worlds. Take control of key infrastructure. Install friendly local government. Reward cooperation and punish resistance. These methods had worked perfectly with every other conquered species. But humans responded to them in ways that broke all the rules. When the hegemony took control of power plants, humans would overload the reactors to cause explosions. When they installed puppet governments, humans would assassinate the collaborators. When they offered rewards for information, humans would provide false intelligence that led to ambushes. Every standard tactic produced the opposite of its intended result. The worst incident happened on the colony world of New Perth. The planet was surrounded and cut off from all outside help. 50,000 human civilians were trapped in the capital city with no hope of rescue. The hegemony commander offered generous surrender terms, safe passage for civilians, and fair treatment for soldiers who laid down their weapons. The human response was to request a meeting to discuss the terms. War Prime Kethmore agreed because negotiation was always preferable to costly urban warfare. He landed with a small escort in the city center for the diplomatic conference. The human delegation seemed ready to accept the reasonable surrender conditions, but it was all a trap designed with inhuman cunning. The humans had spent weeks placing nuclear charges under the major buildings in the city. They had evacuated their own people through hidden tunnels while pretending to negotiate. When the hegemony delegation was in position, they detonated the weapons. The explosion vaporized the entire city center along with War Prime Kethmore and his staff. 20,000 hegemony soldiers died instantly in the nuclear fire, but the humans had also killed their own civilians who could not be evacuated in time. 5,000 human men, women, and children died in the blast they had planned themselves. This was the moment that broke hegemony understanding of human psychology. No other species would sacrifice their own population to kill enemies. The instinct to protect civilians was universal among intelligent races. But humans had deliberately murdered their own people to achieve a military objective. Zexithera remembered the shocked silence in the command center when the reports came in. Hegemony officers could not comprehend what had happened. They ran computer simulations trying to find a logical explanation for human behavior, but the math did not work when the variables included species willing to commit genocide against themselves. The war continued, but hegemony morale was collapsing. Soldiers refused to enter human cities without massive support. Pilots demanded extra pay for missions over human space. Medical staff requested transfers away from human casualties because they feared being poisoned or bombed while providing treatment. Commander Kate Johnson sent a message to all hegemony forces that became famous among both sides. She said that humans would never surrender no matter how many died. She said that every alien who invaded human space would pay with their life. She said that humans preferred death to slavery and would choose extinction before submission. The message was broadcast on all frequencies so every hegemony soldier could hear it. But the truly terrifying part was not the words but the tone. Commander Johnson was not angry or desperate or afraid. She sounded happy. She sounded like someone who was enjoying a challenging game. She sounded like killing aliens was the most fun she had ever had. As Zexithera finished describing the ground campaigns, she saw the horror in her interrogators' faces. They were beginning to understand what their own species looked like to alien eyes. They were seeing themselves as the galaxy would see them from now on, not as liberators or heroes, but as the most dangerous predators in known space. Zexithara looked at the two humans sitting across from her with eyes that had seen too much. Commander Jake Morrison and Dr. Lisa Park waited for her to continue, but she could see they were already disturbed by what they had heard. The truth she was about to tell them would be worse than anything that came before. The interrogation room felt smaller now. The walls seemed to press closer as if the weight of revelation was crushing the space between them. Zexithara had learned to speak their language fluently in just 3 months. This ability to adapt quickly was something her interrogators found impressive, but it was nothing compared to what she was about to reveal about human adaptability. The surrender had not come because the hegemony was losing the war. Even after all the casualties and setbacks, they still had more ships and better technology. They could have continued fighting for years and probably would have won eventually through sheer numbers. But the hegemony leadership had discovered something about humans that made victory meaningless. Dr. Lisa Park asked what had changed the alien leadership's mind. Zexithara explained that it was not one discovery but many small realizations that built into a terrifying understanding. The hegemony had scientists studying every aspect of the war. They analyzed human tactics and weapons and communications. But the most important research was being done by their xenobiologists. The breakthrough came when hegemony medical teams examined captured human soldiers. They wanted to understand how humans could fight so effectively, despite their primitive technology. What they found challenged everything the galaxy knew about intelligent species and warfare. Human brain chemistry during combat was completely different from other species. When most aliens experienced stress or fear, their bodies released chemicals that made them want to avoid danger. Their reflexes slowed down and their thinking became confused. This was a survival mechanism that kept individuals alive by making them retreat from threats. But human brains worked in the opposite way. When humans experienced combat stress, their bodies flooded with chemicals that made them faster and stronger and more focused. Pain became less noticeable. Fear turned into excitement. Exhaustion was replaced by energy that could last for hours. Humans actually became better fighters when they were injured or threatened. Commander Jake Morrison asked if this was why human soldiers seemed to enjoy battle. Zexithara nodded and explained that hegemony researchers had recorded thousands of hours of human communications during combat. They expected to hear fear and desperation like other species. Instead, they heard laughter and singing and expressions of satisfaction. Humans gave their weapons personal names and talked to them like friends. They made jokes while under fire. They competed with each other to see who could kill more enemies. They celebrated victories by drinking alcohol and telling stories about the battle. War was not just something humans could do well. It was something they genuinely enjoyed doing. The xenobiologist made another discovery that shocked the hegemony even more. Human evolution had been shaped by constant warfare for millions of years. Every aspect of human physiology was designed for fighting. Their forward-facing eyes for tracking prey, their endurance for long hunts, their hands for making and using tools as weapons. But the most frightening discovery was about human intelligence itself. The same mental abilities that let humans create art and music and poetry also made them incredibly effective at killing. Human creativity could design new weapons in minutes. Human problem-solving could find weaknesses in any defense. Human communication could coordinate complex attacks across vast distances. Dr. Lisa Park realized what this meant for humanity's future in the galaxy. Zexithara confirmed her fears. The hegemony had shared their research with other alien species. The word was spreading that humans were not just another intelligent race. They were apex predators that had learned to use technology as a weapon. The final piece of evidence came from studying human history more carefully. The hegemony had thought human wars were proof of their primitive nature. But deeper analysis revealed something much more disturbing. Every human conflict had made them better at warfare. Each generation of soldiers was more effective than the last. Human military technology advanced faster than any other species in galactic history. In just 200 years, they had gone from chemical weapons to nuclear bombs to spacefaring warships. Other species took thousands of years to make similar progress. Humans compressed millennia of development into centuries through constant innovation, driven by endless warfare. The hegemony leadership realized they were not fighting a young, chaotic species that would eventually become civilized. They were fighting the end result of evolutionary pressure that had created the perfect killing machine. A species that treated war like other races treated art or science or philosophy, something to be studied and perfected and enjoyed. Admiral Susan Hayes entered the interrogation room at this point. She was a senior coalition officer who had been listening to the conversation from outside. Her presence made Zexthera nervous because the admiral represented the military power that had defeated her people. But she continued her account because the truth needed to be told completely. The surrender decision was made when hegemony analysts calculated what would happen if the war continued. Humans were learning from every battle and adapting their tactics constantly. Each engagement taught them more about fighting aliens. Their technology was improving rapidly as they reverse-engineered captured hegemony equipment. More importantly, the war was changing human society in ways that terrified alien observers. Human civilians were becoming militarized. Human children were learning warfare in schools. Human scientists were focusing all research on military applications. The entire species was transforming into a civilization dedicated entirely to the art of war. Zexthera told them that the hegemony leadership had faced an impossible choice. They could continue the war and probably win through attrition, but victory would take decades and cost millions of lives, and at the end they would face a human species that had spent those decades learning how to fight aliens more effectively. Or they could surrender now, while humans still remembered what peace was like, while human society still had artists and teachers and farmers alongside soldiers, while there was still hope that humans might choose to remain peaceful after the war ended. The terrifying alternative was a humanity that had spent generations at war with aliens, a species that had perfected the art of killing non-human intelligence, a civilization that saw other races not as neighbors or trading partners, but as targets for conquest. The galaxy was not ready to face that version of humanity. Admiral Hayes asked what this meant for the future of human-alien relations. Zexthera's answer was simple and chilling. Every species in the galaxy now knew what humans were capable of in war. Some would try to become allies for protection. Others would try to destroy humanity before it became too powerful. None would ever trust humans to remain peaceful. The interrogation ended with a question that hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Dr. Lisa Park asked if the hegemony had made the right choice in surrendering. Zexthera looked at all three humans with compound eyes that reflected their faces like broken mirrors. She said that time would tell whether mercy had saved the galaxy or doomed it. Outside the interrogation room windows, the stars shone with ancient light. Among those stars, other alien civilizations were making their own choices about how to deal with humanity. Some prepared for war, others prepared for alliance. All of them prepared for a future where humans would never again be underestimated.